Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. It's a nice, bright, sunny day again, and chances are if you've had your corn in the ground for a while, you start looking and boy, there are a few weeds popping up, but here's the problem. If they're Roundup resistant, what are you going to tank mix with your Roundup to make sure you get great weed control? We'll talk about some of your options today.
Well, you're talking about preparing for a crop that isn't even in the ground yet. When we think about winter wheat, we've already got some problems showing up when we get cool temperatures and moisture especially, but even in good weather, we can have disease problems pop up. We'll talk about disease control options in wheat.
We've got a weed of the week that may be showing up already on your farm. We'll tell you how to stop it later in the show. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
This time of year, we think about how we don't want to be standing around in the mud when we get those spring rains and that kind of thing. You know, it's a temporary inconvenience. But for our plants that are out in soil that is wet, well, it's not a temporary inconvenience for them. They're stuck there 24/7, and crops just don't like wet feet.
And what we're really talking about here is not just that there's moisture in the ground, it's that there's so much moisture in the ground that the water table has come up into the root zone. That's what we as farmers worry about. When both Darren and I went to college years and years ago, it doesn't matter. I'm sure day one of agronomy, when a student walks in today to college, they're going to probably tell them, look, an ideal soil is about 50% dirt, 25% water, 25% air. Okay, so if you have 25% water in the soil, that's basically considered field capacity for water. But the problem is when the water table comes up, that air percentage goes down to almost nothing. When you have a 40, 45, 50% water in your soil, that's a real problem for crops. They have to have oxygen. Those roots have to get oxygen in order to grow and especially to thrive.
What happens a lot of times if we have a really wet spring, you can see it in your lawn or your garden or out in farmers' fields, that when those roots can't grow deep because the water table is so high, you have shallow rooted crops, a shallow rooted lawn, a shallow rooted garden, whatever the case may be. Now the summer comes around and it gets hot and it gets dry, and our roots are so shallow, our crop is really susceptible to heat stress and also lack of moisture stress because we don't have a good deep root system. The other thing that can happen is if we have heavy winds, a lot of times they'll have what they call lodging, and that's where the crop will tip over because it doesn't have a big anchor with the root system. Instead, it's got a very shallow root system, so it's very susceptible to damage from wind. So we have to be really cautious about that. If there's anything we can do to keep our crops from having wet feet in the spring, that's an important management practice.
One of the management practices that most farmers are using today is called tiling. And this goes back to years ago when they actually used to put clay tile in the ground. Well, today it's all done with plastic. It's the same stuff you put around your house and run it into your sump pump. That's what farmers are using out in fields. 4-inch or 6-inch tile lines, we call them. Just plastic tubes running, let's say, every 40 or 50 feet out in the field. And the point is not to remove all the water, not even to remove lots of water, just to lower the water table down to, say, 3 feet in the ground. That's it. So farmers are certainly not removing all the water when they do this. They're just lowering the water table and getting that water level back to field capacity. Like we talked about a little earlier, we'd like 25% water in the soil. The soil just can't handle the 50% and allow roots to really grow.
And there's really two ways to look at it. You can say, well, okay, we need to remove water. I look at it this way. We need to make sure there's plenty of oxygen in there so that our roots can live and so that all the little soil microbes can live. Because yes, it's easy to focus on the crop and you can certainly see the root system and the impact that it has when you have that water table come up and your roots just flat out die. What we don't see is the billions and billions of living microorganisms that would be just in a handful of soil. And once you fill up that soil profile with moisture and take the oxygen out, now all these aerobic microorganisms are ones that need air to live. they'll die off. And we just can't have that, because when all the microbes die in our soil, then our soils just aren't as productive the rest of the season, and it takes a year or even 2 years to build that microbial life back up.
Whenever you listen to organic farmers especially, they'll talk about how we've got to have that soil in good condition, and it's got to be a living organism, and it can really help crops without the use of chemicals and things like that. Well, you know what one of the most important factors there is having enough oxygen in the soil. So if a farmer can't do that, there's no way, whether he's using herbicides or he's not, whether he's using fertilizer or not, there's just no way to raise a good crop.
So if you want to be successful raising any crop, you have to make sure that it doesn't have wet feet and there's plenty of oxygen in the soil. The other thing you'll have to do is make sure you don't have weeds competing with your crop, like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
Get the most from the genetic potential in your crops, reduce plant stress, and increase yield. BioForge upregulates key genes to keep roots growing and reduce ethylene for improved plant stress tolerance. BioForge mixes well with other products for easy application with every pass through the field. BioForge, progressive growers' choice to improve root growth, reduce crop stress, and increase yield. Make every growing day count with BioForge from Stoller, USA.
Whether you're feeding cattle, milking cows, or baling hay, the work on your farm is never done, which is why you need equipment that works as hard as you do. Get the efficiency and versatility you need with Case IH. From Farmall compact and utility tractors to balers and mowers, all Case IH equipment is designed with one thing in mind: getting the job done. To learn more, visit caseih.com/livestock.
I will take action against herbicide-resistant weeds. I will know my weeds, and I will stop them before they go to seed. I will do whatever it takes to give my crops the upper hand, and I will use multiple herbicide sites of action because every action counts. I will take action, this time for all time.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
One of the most important things you can do for your wheat crop is making sure you control diseases. I mean, let's face it, you compared wheat to corn and soybeans. Wheat's planted earlier, it's got a lot thicker stand, it traps more moisture, it's raised early in the spring where, conditions are just wetter and cooler and it's just ripe for disease. Plus the fact that there's so much more money being thrown into corn and soybean disease protection as opposed to wheat. I mean, how many new great wheat varieties have we come up with in the last few years that are completely resistant to tan spot? I haven't seen that yet.
Well, okay, you're right about that. We do have more disease problems early in the season, especially with wheat. And when we're talking about winter wheat and spring wheat, I mean, there's lots of different kinds of wheat out there. And whether it was planted in the fall or it was planted early this spring, I mean, yes, there's going to be a difference in terms of what growth stage you're at. So we're going to talk about the different families of fungicides that you can use, give you some strategies as far as picking products out, and then just talk specifically about what you're going to be doing this spring, what your timing is.
Okay, the three main timings for spraying fungicide in wheat are at herbicide application, at flag leaf, and at heading.
So when we look at the earlier timings, the herbicide timing and the flag leaf timing, pretty much all options are on the table. You can use any family of fungicide out there for disease control. Now, when I say control, I probably should say disease prevention, because for any of these products to work, they have to be sprayed before you have disease show up all over your plants. Now, you're going to hear people talk about preventative fungicides and curative fungicides. Really, frankly, I think it's a lot of garbage. For all those products to work, they have to be out there before there's a problem, because they give a good layer of protection. But once you've got a leaf tissue that has a whole bunch of spots on it that are covered with disease, you're really never going to clean that up completely. Yes, you can stop the disease from spreading, but you can't turn those brown spots on the leaves back to green. You've lost that spot on your leaf forever in terms of it gathering photosynthesis.
Okay, talking specifically about the products you could use, like Darren said, the early timings, either at herbicide application or at flag leaf, you can use anything you want. You can use a strobilurin, something like Headline or Quadris or Avito. You can use a triazole or any of the products that contain a triazole. There are lots of different ones out there. There are also some new fungicides that are coming on the market. One that gets talked about quite a bit is Xemium, that's in Preaxor. So you've got some choices there. It just depends on what you want to do and what maybe makes the most sense for your operation, what you've liked, what you haven't liked. I don't really care on our farm which one I'm using exactly. I just know this. I want to rotate things as I go on, or I want to use combination products. And what we found is a lot of these big companies are trying to encourage you as well to use the combination products, because over in Europe, for example, Darren and I were over there a few years ago, and the strobilurins just don't work anymore. They're not controlling disease. People overuse them. We encourage you, use combination products. Use things that have a strobilurin and a triazole, or a strobilurin and Xemium.
The other thing that gets a little bit tricky is the whole rate discussion. When we're talking about wheat that's just a few inches tall, there's not a whole lot of crop out there, not a whole lot of leaf area that we need to cover, and it certainly makes sense that we can use a lower rate than we would, say, at flag leaf, where we have all kinds of plant tissue out there that we're trying to protect. I mean, it just makes so much sense. We should use a higher rate later on in the season. And we'll talk to people in different parts of the country. If you've got heavy disease pressure, by all means, use a little stronger rate. If you've got light disease pressure, if any, like we see in a lot of the arid climates where wheat is grown, guys say, man, I don't have much moisture. I'm just not anticipating a whole lot of disease issues out there. I'm going to use a half rate, especially early in the season at herbicide timing. In many cases, I think that's a very good recommendation, and that's plenty of rate to give you the kind of prevention that you need.
And then at that point, a lot of those people are picking the older, cheaper options as opposed to the newer, more expensive options that seem to be just a little bit better.
Well, when you talk about things like Tilt or Bumper, for example, they're so cheap. Yes, it doesn't cost much money, and for guys who don't think they're going to have a big issue and don't need a lot of prevention out there, that can work fine for you. But again, like you were saying, Brian, those combination products give you so much more flexibility and resistance management that in most cases guys are switching over to some of those products like a Stratego or a Quilt.
Okay, one other big question. A lot of people will say, well, how much residual do I get out of these products? I'd figure 1 to 2 weeks. Some companies will talk to you about a month's worth of residual. No, a week or two, that's probably all you're going to end up getting. Now, we also said, hey, later in the season, you might have to switch products. What it comes down to is don't use a strobilurin after flag leaf. So flag leaf is the very end gate window. The problem is if you use a strobilurin later, test results have shown that you might have a higher incidence of DON in your crop. We just don't want any more toxin in your crop. That's obviously a bad thing. So then you have to switch to a straight triazole late in the season, something like Prosaro, Caramba, or even the old Folicure or Aureus, which is really inexpensive now.
The other thing I don't think we mentioned is you're only going to protect the plant tissue that you cover. So we have to get great coverage on these products. And you know, here's one myth that I hear a lot. Well, I'm going to spray it flag leaf and that will give me some help against head scab later on. No, it's going to give you zero help against head scab later on. It will help you with the rusts on the flag leaf, but it won't help you with anything above that, like up on the head. So you have to have emergence of that head before you can protect it. And a lot of times when we're talking about head scab prevention, we're talking about at least 10 to 15% of that head is going to be opened up and flowering. At that point, you can get good prevention of head scab with some of the key triazoles like a Prosaro or a Caramba.
One last comment I'd make real quick. We farm in a pretty dry area of the country too, and we spray all our wheat every time 3 times. herbicide timing, flag leaf, heading, at least try some on your farm and see if it pays. If it doesn't pay, fine. I mean, don't continue to do it. But all I can tell you is a lot of these fungicides now are pretty good. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money to run out there. We have tram lines in our weeds, so we can go out anytime we want and go spray ourselves. Inexpensive to do it. Just something for you to consider.
Well, preventing disease is very important, but so is weed control. Can you identify this week's weed?
Could I boost my potential by foliar feeding?
You can. Foliar feeding can correct nutrient deficiencies and sustain your crop through stress. It's a great way to deliver nutrients that your crop lacks to reach its full potential. Research proves it. Applied alone or in combination with your crop protection program, Agro-Liquid products assure that when the season presents opportunity, you can boost your crop's yield potential by foliar feeding. For more info, visit agroliquid.com.
If you could see how nitrogen loss causes yield loss, you'd fix it. So fix it right, with the stabilizer proven to reduce all 3 ways nitrogen escapes. Nutrisphere N Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager. It keeps nitrogen in a more readily available form longer. With today's market and environment, it's a high priority to keep your nitrogen on track. To higher yield with Nutrisphere N.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's ahead above the rest.
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with Yield Track. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. Yield Track will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch Yield Tracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with Yield Track from Titan Machinery.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
Over the last few years, we've had a lot of farmers around the country calling us saying, hey, Roundup isn't working in my corn. What should I throw along with my Roundup to kill all these Roundup resistant weeds in corn? Well, fortunately, most of those weeds are broadleaf weeds. And you know what? It's pretty easy to kill broadleaf weeds in corn, so we have a lot of options for you.
Well, I think not only are they saying Roundup isn't working in my corn, they're just saying Roundup isn't working in my system on these broadleaf weeds. And you know what? I want to have cotton or I want to have soybeans in my rotation, and I just can't be successful in those crops if I don't completely wipe the weeds out in corn. You know, when you have corn or wheat in the rotation, there is zero excuse to let a broadleaf weed go. We've got lots of good products that we can do. If you're not killing all the broadleaves in your corn, switch products, switch programs, because there's better choices out there.
Now, before we go into our post-emerge recommendations, I want you to think back, what did you use pre-emerge? What I'm trying to say here is we really don't want you to use the same chemical family twice. The other thing you need to consider is, what did I use for an insecticide at planting time? If you used counter insecticide, we really don't want you using any ALS. Just make sure you're talking to your agronomist so he knows, hey, I use this for an insecticide, this is what I use for a pre, now give me the best recommendation possible post-emerge.
The other thing that we talk about with pre-emerge herbicides versus post is atrazine. If you've already used some atrazine with a pre-emerge herbicide, you can't use any post, but if it still is an option post-emerge to use some atrazine, most of them will actually work better if you put 1/4 to 1/2 pound of atrazine with them, if you can do that in your rotation and your soil conditions.
All right, I want to mention before we get into some of the main ones, just a couple other things you might not have thought about, like Buctril, for example. You might say, well, I haven't used Buctril in 20 years. Well, that may be, but let's keep in mind, Buctril is good on wild buckwheat, and we do have some weaknesses in a lot of different different programs where wild buckwheat just isn't controlled perfectly, you can tank mix Bucktril together with some of these other products if you want to get a little more kick on wild buckwheat. Okay, so the product I prefer if a guy says, well, I don't know exactly what kind of weeds I got all of them. And they're big. I'd probably go out there with Status. Status, I think, is great. It's got a little bit of dicamba in there. The main product in there was diflufenzapyr. You can't buy that straight, by the way. But anyway, this Status is excellent. The problem is it's sold out all over the country. So if you lucked out, you got your Status, excellent. Otherwise, chances are next year there will be plenty available. It's just in really tight supply this year. If you can't get Status, what I would suggest to you is you might consider using some old Banville or Clarity. I don't like those as well. The Status does have a corn safener in there, so it's going to make it a lot safer for the crop. But I'll tell you this, with Loudus, it's got the same corn safener, isoxadyphon, that Status does. So literally what you could do is take Loudus, put a little bit of Banville or Clarity in there, and in effect, because of that corn safener, you've now safened your dicamba. It's just something for you to consider if you can't get Status in your area.
If you're trying to avoid all the issues that come up with dicamba, like volatilization and drift, you may just go with an HPPD product all by itself. Again, Loudus, Impact, Callisto, Armazon, those products are very good. They're pretty crop safe, so you can spray them on a little taller crop than what you could spray just a straight dicamba on. And many guys like that, especially when we're putting in a fungicide, say at that V5 to V7 timing. Well, you can wait until about that stage and spray your HPPD at the same time if you don't have a whole lot of weeds coming.
Okay, but the problem with the HPPDs, they are a little weak on the viney species like wild buckwheat. So that's where throwing Bucktril in might help, throwing a little atrazine in would help. But again, we're talking Callisto, Loudus, Armazon, and Impact. Now, Impact, because of the rebate with Roundup, it's going to be the least expensive. But it just depends on what else you're using on your farm. Maybe there's some other tie-in rebate that's going to lower your price. You really want to work with your retailer and your agronomist, because those four products are very, very similar, all in the same chemical family, same weeds they're going to kill. You kind of have to look at, well, which one is really going to dollar out the least expensive for me and my farm.
So again, there are a lot of choices for broadleaf control in corn. Just make sure you're choosing products that are going to completely wipe out the weeds you have, especially if they're Roundup resistant. That way in your next rotation, you don't have as many weeds to fight.
Well, speaking of weeds, we've got a tough one. It's coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You work to protect your farm's legacy and to keep it going. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is yellow foxtail. Now, when you think of tough weeds, yellow foxtail might not show up high in your list, but here's why it shows up so high in my list. Because often we find millions of yellow foxtail plants out in fields, and unless you control it pre-emerge, if you let that foxtail get up even a ½ inch tall, you've already lost yield. And don't listen to all these studies that say, oh, you can kill the weeds when they're 4 inches tall. Get real. I mean, especially if you're in a drier area of the country, you got to kill those weeds before they come up if you have very many of them at all. Sure, if you have 10 weeds in the field, no big deal, but when you have a lot, get it under control with a pre-emerge herbicide.
When we think about yellow foxtail, it often gets grouped in with other foxtails and it's called pigeon grass. But the way to tell it apart from other foxtails is look for long tufts of hair at the base of the leaf blade right where it hooks up to the stem.
Here's what we want you to do. In soybeans, use Sonalan, Treflan, or Prowl pre-emerge. Post-emerge, it's pretty easy. Select Max, Arrow, something like that will be just fine. Just about any grass killer post. Pre-emerge in corn, Harness, Surpass, Outlook, and Dual are
and
the
use
best.
Stronger rates. We're cutting the rates back in a lot of Roundup Ready and Liberty Link crops. Use stronger rates.
Roundup is still excellent on yellow foxtail. Liberty, it takes a little higher use rate with Liberty. Make sure you're using the full rate. In wheat, we would suggest you start with the new Zidua. I like Prepare even better than that. And then post-emerge, you can come with Axial, Everest 2.0, just about any of the grass killers. We'll do fairly decent on yellow foxtail. The Everest might be a little weaker than the Axial, but still pretty decent.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
When Brian and I were growing up, we were involved in a lot of baling on our farm. We had livestock, and between small square bales of oat straw for bedding or small squares and round bales for the cattle of alfalfa, we kept busy in the summers. Today, the machines are much better than what we worked with in the past. If you haven't upgraded balers recently, we'll show you a couple reasons why you should consider doing so in today's Iron Talk. Large square balers have risen in popularity, but the vast majority of baling is still done with large round balers. As cellulosic ethanol production grows, we're seeing a wider variety of feedstuffs getting baled up and some pretty tough-duty assignments for balers in these situations. When you get a new piece of equipment, one of the expectations is you'll have less downtime and less maintenance than if you're running something old. One of the biggest improvements in round balers is right in the front at pickup. Old machines like the one we used to run had 4 tines for picking up the hay or corn stalks. These tines were subject to constant abuse. Plus, they didn't maintain a consistent flow of product moving into the baler, and our bale quality would suffer as a result, making it tougher to stack them and less likely that they would store well for a long period of time. Today, new round balers are often using 5 tines to pick up the material and even have a roller wind guard which acts like a thumb to keep the light material from building up and to keep a more continuous feed. This system is much more durable as well. The other big change is that we used to have belts and use them exclusively to form the bale. Now rolls and belts are being used, leading to a tighter, more dense bale with a flatter face and more square shoulders. The result is that your bales stand up to weather longer and are easier to stack, load, and transport. All these things lead to a good result for your livestock operation and improve the value of your bales that you're putting onto the cash market too. In cellulosic production, they need bales that can be used throughout the year, and the better the condition you can keep the bales in, the easier they'll be to work with at the ethanol plant. So if baling is a big part of your operation, or if you're a younger guy who wants to get into farming but doesn't have enough land to do it yet, the newest round balers on the market are a significant upgrade from what we used to run on the farm. Depending on your farm size and the amount of custom work you do, this could be an excellent investment for your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
Whether you're feeding cattle, milking cows, or baling hay, the work on your farm is never done. Which is why you need equipment that works as hard as you do. Get the efficiency and versatility you need with Case IH. From farm-all compact and utility tractors to balers and mowers, all Case IH equipment is designed with one thing in mind: getting the job done. To learn more, visit caseih.com/livestock.
Get the most from the genetic potential in your crops, reduce plant stress, and increase yield. BioForge upregulates key genes to keep roots growing and reduce ethylene for improved plant stress tolerance. BioForge mixes well with other products for easy application with every pass through the field. BioForge, progressive growers' choice to improve root growth, reduce crop stress, and increase yield. Make every growing day count with BioForge from Stoller, USA.
Can I grow my crop without the expense of fertilizer additives?
You can. Conditions forcing you to make some tough choices? Choose agricultural liquid fertilizers and you won't need stabilizers or nutrient managers, eliminating expense and hassle. Millions of acres and years of replicated research have proven that with ProGerminator, SureK, High Energy and MicroLink, you can grow a great crop without costly additives. To learn more and find a dealer near you, visit agroliquid.com.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us each weekday for Ag PhD Radio on Sirius XM Channel 80.
And tune in again next time for another Ag PhD TV, where we'll have a Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Fertilizer is a term commonly used to describe plant food. Did you realize all growing plants require primary, secondary, and micronutrients in order to grow properly and produce food for humans? For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.